understand things for myself. So I get to the point where I say, okay, what do we eat? We eat macronutrients. What are those three macronutrients? Carbohydrate, fat, and protein. So where do we find those foods, and what are they? And can we put all the things that we actually eat into some kind of overall framework so it helps me to make sense of it? So then you start doing a bit of investigation. You say, oh, this is really interesting, because there is actually only one pure carbohydrate on the planet, which is the blue bar over on the left hand side, and that is sucrose, what we know as table sugar. Has no vitamins, no minerals, has nothing of any value whatsoever. It's just complete useless junk. No protein, no fat. So it's entirely on blue over on the left hand side. Over on the right hand side you've got the 100% fats, and those would be things like olive oil, coconut oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, and so on. Not butter, interestingly, because butter has got some protein, so butter starts sort of moving in towards the centre. But then the next massive realisation that I made, and this was when I was trying to understand obesity, is that nature tends to provide, the real food around us, it comes in essentially carb proteins or fat proteins, because outside of those two extremes where you've got pure carbohydrate or pure fat, protein is in everything. And that's another really interesting finding. So people say, oh, you need to eat all these different things to get protein. No, there's protein in lettuce, there's protein in an apple, there's protein in bed. Yeah, there's loads of protein in white fish and chicken breast, but there's actually protein in everything. So as long as you start eating the right proteins, you're actually not going to struggle to get protein. But then you realise that nature kind of provides carb proteins, which is what vegans, plant-based people would eat, and that's your fruit, vegetables, grains, and what we call legumes, which is beans and pulses. And then nature provides fat proteins, which are the things that the vegans wouldn't eat, and that's your meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And that was another fascination for me, because there are only a couple of foods in nature where you've got carbohydrate, fat, and protein all in good measure. And those are your nuts and seeds and avocados. But the really interesting one in among all of those is nuts, because how many people will tell you when you start eating nuts you just can't stop? It would be
Yeah.
a binge food for certain people in the real food world. You could overeat nuts quite easily, and my theory on that is you can overeat them quite easily because they are quite unique in nature. They are this fat carb combination that nature just doesn't usually provide, but human beings find it completely irresistible. So I then say to people, okay, if I give you a carb protein, so I give you dry bread or dry crackers, and say how much can you eat, you won't be able to eat very much. So if I go over to a fat protein and say, right, there's a block of cheese, just keep going, you might be able to eat more cheese than you could the crackers, but you've got a limit. Then I say to you,
Hmm.
right, you can have the cheese and the crackers together, or the cheese and the bread together. You've got no limit, because you're
Yeah.
in that fat carb combo. And the fake food manufacturers, and again this kind of ties in my background in HR coming into the nutrition world. I've been around food science labs, I've seen the guinea pigs, and they're usually students, they're usually your age, and they line them up against these little hatches and they put through a food, and then they say, right, score it for taste, palatability, aftertaste. What did you think of it? How long was it in your mouth? Was it creamy enough? Was it smooth enough? And then you give the feedback, you and 20 other people, and then they adapt the recipe, and then they give you, and they just go at it until it's Pringles or it's Dunkin' Donuts. It is completely irresistible. Once you start eating it, you just will not be able to stop, and that will be because it will be the perfect carb-fat combo that nature doesn't make, so you haven't evolved to be able to cope with it, and you will be able to overeat it like there's no tomorrow.